456,000 years ago, the Alban Hills volcano tore open south of where Rome would one day stand. What it threw out settled and welded into a bed of red ignimbrite ash, meters deep, running under the whole future city. Then nothing. For 400 millennia, nobody touched it. The first builders to wake that chemistry up were nowhere near it. Greeks on Santorini, on Delos, on Crete, at Chimeros on Rhodes, were already grinding their own volcanic soil and crushed pottery into the plaster of cisterns and baths. The hydraulic reaction was not a Roman invention. It arrived borrowed. Rome took the borrowed trick and found itself sitting on the largest, richest deposit of the stuff in the ancient world, directly beneath the capital. From the 2nd century before Christ, crews cut the red ash out from under their own hills, bound it with burnt lime, and raised walls with it. Walls like the city circuit at Privernum. The practice ran for generations before anyone wrote it down. Around 25 years before Christ, an army engineer named Vitruvius sat down to do it. Book 2, Chapter 6, the famous passage on volcanic powder. Read it, and something is missing. No lime-to-ash ratio. No quantities, nothing to measure by. The written-down recipe is not there. The numbers everyone quotes sit one chapter earlier and describe a different material. Book 2, Chapter 5, on ordinary mortars. 3 parts pit, sand to 1 of lime. 2 parts river or sea sand to 1. Ground potsherds at a 3rd part, to improve it. Sand, not volcanic ash. The famous ratio was borrowed too. 1 proportion in the whole book touches seawater, and it is 3 books away, at 5:12. Powder from the coast between Cumae and the promontory of Minerva. 2 parts of it to 1 of lime, mixed with water inside a ring of driven oaken piles. That is the entire marine recipe. Those few lines were enough for a king. Between 22 and 10 years before Christ, Herod built Sebastos at Caesarea Maritima, the largest artificial harbor ever raised in open sea. No bay, no headland, no shelter of any kind. A working port with warehouses and a lighthouse, dropped onto a straight, exposed coast. It began coming apart almost immediately. By the end of the 1st century, inside 2 generations of the men who poured it, the outer breakwaters of Sebastos were in serious structural trouble. The seaward sections were taking swell the recipe had never been tested against. Nothing in Vitruvius covered that. Then the 13th of December, 115. Reinhardt and colleagues tie the major destruction at Caesarea to a tsunami on that date. Blocks the size of rooms came off their beds and were left lying askew on the seabed. After that, the failure was irreversible. Inland, away from swell and salt, the same binder was doing something nobody had attempted. In Rome, between roughly 113 and 125, a dome went up 43.3 meters across. Travertine aggregate at the base, tufa in the middle, pumice at the crown, coffered, thinned all the way to the oculus. None of that came from a stronger material. Measured Roman samples average around 12.9 megapascals, and the Pantheon's mix is estimated at 2 to 5. Modern structural concrete runs from 20 to 100. That dome stands on geometry and graded weight. Geometry kept the dome up. Demand is what killed the vault. After Constantine, the buildings that needed vaulting stopped being commissioned, and Lynn Lancaster's argument is demand side. Baths, markets, amphitheaters, the mass assembly halls, gave way to Christian basilicas, and a basilica is far more easily roofed in timber. The vault stopped being ordered. Everything standing behind that demand unwinds with it. The state organized labor, the imperial capital that paid for it, the long-distance shipping that carried volcanic ash from one coast to another. Nobody keeps a supply chain alive for a building nobody is ordering. No ancient source records any of it. The keys simply go quiet. At Caesarea, the sea finishes what it started. With no empire left to fund repairs, the harbor is unusable by the 6th century, and its breakwaters now lie more than 5 meters underwater. What still stands above ground is the luckiest, best maintained, most geologically fortunate fraction of everything Rome ever poured. In Rome, the lime fires never went out. In the 8th century, a large kiln is installed in the exedra of the Crypta Balbi, fed with smashed Roman marble, architecture, statues, inscriptions, calcined above 840 degrees. So many kilns that the district takes the name Calcarario. The knowledge of burning lime never lapsed. It was being used to eat the evidence. North of the Alps, in those same decades, A scribe at the Abbey of St. Pantaleon in Cologne is copying out De Architectura, around 800 to 825. That manuscript survives today as British Library Harley 2767, and Einhard and Alcuin discuss its technical vocabulary. While Roman marble burned, the book explaining how Romans built was being carefully rewritten. Copies beget copies. Crabinus Morris reads him. So do Hugo of St. Victor, William of Malmesbury, Albertus Magnus, Thomas Aquinas. In 1244 Vincent of Beauvais quotes him again and again in his great compendium. Through the centuries we are told the recipe was lost. Vitruvius is sitting on monastery shelves, being cited by the most read scholars in Europe. The book is safe. The buildings are not. By the 13th century Privernum, lived in without a break since the 2nd century before Christ, 1500 years of it, is finally empty. The mortared masonry of its city wall is left standing where it is. Grass closes over the streets. 700 years of nobody. 2 centuries into that silence, in 1416, Poggio Bracciolini is working the abbey libraries. At St. Gall, he opens a cupboard and lifts out a Vitruvius. The humanists call it a rediscovery. It recovered nothing. A good copy of a book that had never once gone missing. The announcement made it famous. 70 years on, in 1486, Fra Giovanni Sulpicius puts it into print. 92 manuscripts survive in public collections today, 8th century to 15th. The 1500-year blackout never happened. So the question was always the wrong one. Not what was the recipe. Why does the stuff last? 2001. Robert Holfelder of Colorado and John Olson of Victoria put that question to the material itself, with a London architect, Christopher Brandon. They called it Romacons. An Italian cement company, Italcementi, paid for it and lent them a hydraulic coring rig. Divers began pulling gray cylinders, up to 20 feet long, out of Roman harbors across the Mediterranean. But a core can only show what the Romans had already made. In September 2004, the team went further. At Brindisi, they built a full-scale Roman pila from scratch, a timber form standing in the Adriatic, lime and volcanic ash tipped into seawater and tamped down by hand, to the proportions in Vitruvius. Not a reading of the recipe, a test of it. They cored their own block at 6 months, then again at a year. Both times, compressive strength and stiffness were still climbing. It was getting stronger while they watched it. The whole program came out in 2014, under a title that now reads as a question rather than a claim. Building for Eternity. For years before that, in 2010, Marie Jackson and colleagues had asked which ash Rome's greatest buildings were actually made of. Not the Bay of Naples. Imperial mortars used pozzolana Ross from under the Alban Hills. And the quarrymen were choosy. For the highest grade work, the Forum and Markets of Trajan, they cut only the middle horizons, the least clay-altered bands in the face. 3 years later, the same group carried marine cores into Lawrence Berkeley and set them in the advanced light source, on beamlines 5.32.21, 5.32.22, and 12.2.2. What came up on the detector was a crystal, aluminium tobermarite, rare in nature, growing inside a 2,000-year-old binder. Every sample under that beam had spent 2,000 years soaking in seawater. So in the summer of 2016, researchers went inland to Privernum, a town lived in from the 2nd century before Christ until the 13th after, and shipped mortar out of the city wall. The bags went into storage. While those bags sat, the marine question resolved in 2017. At Portus Cosanus, Bianus Sinus, Portus Neronis, and Portus Trianus, seawater percolating through the concrete was growing interlocking plates of aluminium tobermarite and phillipsite inside pumice clasts and pores. That concrete really does toughen with age. Only in the sea. Then the Privernum bags came out of storage. On the 6th of January 2023, Seymour, Marat, Sabatini, Di Tommaso, Weaver, and Mazik published their answer in Science Advances. Those white lumps in Roman mortar, dismissed for a century as careless mixing, were quicklime, mixed hot, driving the whole batch 60 degrees above ambient, with spots past 200. A lump of quicklime is a story until you crack a slab in half. They cast slabs, cracked them deliberately, 0.5 millimeter of gap, and pushed water through. 10 to 30 liters an hour, straight down the fracture. In the lime-clast mixes the flow slowed, then stopped, inside 30 days. The slabs without lime clasts never sealed. Not once. Which sends the argument back to Vitruvius. He calls structural lime extincta. For plaster, a different word entirely, macerata. The team proposes that extincta might mean lime hydrated at the same moment as everything else. Hot mixing, written down 20 centuries ago. They say only that it is possible. That hedge matters. A year later, the question moves north, to the Venice Lagoon, where Delaria and colleagues cut into a first-century well cistern and find Phlegrean fields tephra, strongly reacted with lime. Volcanic ash from near Naples, shipped the entire length of Italy to build something that would sit underwater. The chemistry was never the fragile part of this. The freight was. That much is settled. The chemistry is not. In December 2025, a Pompeii paper pushes the quicklime case wider and Marie Jackson objects. The evidence, she says, is not entirely clear from the site, and claiming the Romans never slaked lime would not be correct. She points to the deliberately varied mixes at Trajan's markets. Still unreconciled. What stays open is the part that matters. Nobody knows whether hot mixing was a design for self-healing or just the cheaper way to burn fuel and pay labor. Nobody agrees on what does the work: lime-clasts, tobermarite, philipsite, stratlingite. The recipe sat on a shelf the whole time. Why the stuff lasts is still being argued over, in front of a wall standing in a field near Rome.